Where We're From highlights the rich textures, histories, and experiences of the Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American community. Each episode is produced by students at San Jose State University.
Hey guys, this is the SiniGANG, your go-to podcast for Asian American history. Today we're going to talk about an interesting topic, the 1992 LA riots, or for the people that may not know it by that name, the Rooftop Koreans. But first, we're going to introduce ourselves. I'll go first. I'm Aditya Madiraja. I'm a third-year mechanical engineering major.
Hi, I'm Aliana Cabrera. I'm a second-year business major.
Hi everyone, my name is Georgie Augustin and I'm a first-year pre-nursing major.
Hi, I'm Jared Laksamana. I'm a first-year business major.
Hi, my name is Juchon Lim, and I'm a second-year business major.
So, there have been many stories of tensions between Asians and other races, especially since COVID. Today we will discuss another point in history where tensions were high between Asians and African Americans, to ultimately highlight the importance of working together against oppression. So, while Audie and I were doing research for this project, I came across the LA riots, and he tells me, oh, the rooftop Koreans. And I was confused because I hadn't seen anything about the rooftop Koreans at one point. And then he was like, no, they're the same event. And he shows me pictures, and I'm like, how did this even happen? So, Aliana, can you tell us more about this and how they're connected?
Yeah, of course. So basically, the LA riots started from April 29th, 1992, and lasted until May 4th, 1992. And then the riots ended after about 2,000 people suffered injuries and 63 people died. And then the initial reason why the riot started to happen is because of a police officers that were caught on tape killing an African American man named Rodney King in 1991. So Rodney King was an African American who was speeding, which the police murdered him for. This was completely unfair and unjust because although he was in trouble for speeding, it shouldn't have cost him his life.
No, yeah. Usually when you're speeding, you get a ticket or maybe be arrested for something else, but it shouldn't cost you your life.
No, literally. And so this led to violence and riots not only in the African American community, but started uprisings all over LA.
Wait, so if this was about an African American man that got killed by the police, how did it relate to like Koreatown and Korean Americans?
Yeah, so it related to Korean Americans because a little backstory is that a lot of Koreans immigrated from Korea, sorry, to America in around the 70s to 80s, and a lot of the Koreans went to move to LA. And when the Korean Americans had got to America, a lot of them were poor, didn't have a lot of money, so they're in poor neighborhoods, some that were a little not nice, and mainly the main population was Korean Americans and African Americans in Koreatown. And so this affected Korean Americans because a lot of them had small businesses and predominantly African American communities. And due to the violence and riots that were happening all throughout LA, these businesses were collateral damage, meaning that these businesses were constantly being victims of violence, were constantly being robbed, and worse.
Wait, so why were they called the rooftop Koreans?
Oh yeah, so they were called rooftop Koreans because the Korean business owners took arsonists to the rooftops of their own stores to protect themselves. They would basically just shoot at whoever would try to mess with their businesses, whoever try to break in, steal stuff, any sort of violent behavior. The Koreans decided to take matters into their own hands because the police neglected to keep their businesses safe. And that meaning the police barely would come into Koreatown or poor neighborhoods. So they felt they were unsafe in their own community. So that's why they decided to protect themselves. And this event is a prime example of what happens due to racial neglect. The critical race theory further explains this. Juchon, can you tell us a little more about this?
Yeah, so the critical race theory exemplifies the fact how white people may experience more benefits historically and culturally, creating an unfair form of racial hierarchy.
So, what is racial hierarchy?
So, racial hierarchy is basically the belief where white people are in the highest level of hierarchy, while the Asian Americans are more in the middle, and African Americans are in the bottom of the hierarchy. So, an example can be the charges of the officers responsible for killing Rodney King include assault with a deadly weapon and excessive use of force, while the reason for Rodney King's interaction with the police was all due to a DUI. And many times, the police force avoided the areas in LA where prominently Korean Americans and African Americans were located. And Audie, how is this related to whiteness?
Yes, so whiteness plays a role in this event. And an example of that is like how the police did not, again, like Aliana said and Juchan said, they didn't really go into the minority parts of town, like Koreatown. They went and during the riots especially, they put a perimeter around West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, San Fernando Valley, Pacific Palisades, basically a place with a lot of big white community and less minorities. And then places like Koreatown, downtown, all these other areas which are mostly minorities, they weren't really covered by the police or they were just neglected and because they weren't white enough to protect from the riots. And Korean, especially with the Korean store owners, they also got more justice as opposed to black teenagers who got killed by the Korean store owners, which does signify the model minority status of like Asians and how Korean Americans were viewed as higher in the racial hierarchy, like Juchan just mentioned, than black Americans. And white community use this to their advantage. It's called divide and conquer. This is the same tactic that the British used in India and Africa and other parts of the world. Basically, they pitted the two minority groups, in this case, Korean and Black Americans, against each other, and they just ignored the real problems like economic inequality. For example, in those neighborhoods, the Korean Americans were more well off than the African Americans. And of course, police neglected those areas and there's a lot of systematic oppression as well. And this, in a way, allowed the white people to keep their power, and they pitted the other races against each other. So basically, they created a narrative to rule and to keep power, while the other minorities just kind of fight each other.
Yeah, this way that minorities such as Asian Americans and African Americans are compared to each other can be mapped by racial triangulation. This idea that you mentioned that Asians aren't seen as white enough to have privileges that comes with being seen as an American, but can be mapped with another factor that black people are seen as an inferior racial group compared to Asians.
Wait, so Joji, can you explain in detail what racial triangulation is?
Yeah, so racial triangulation is an illustration that explains how Asian Americans are seen as superior because they are the model minority, but they are still seen as outsiders and alienated. On the other hand, African Americans are viewed as inferior and don't have some privileges that Asians have. But unlike Asians, they are seen as Americans. By putting these racial groups on opposite axes on the same graph of racial hierarchy, it's easy to be compared and contrasted. And instead of helping each other thrive, it's easy to gain dominance by fighting each other, by picking on the weak, by picking on one another. This upholds the dominance of whiteness and perpetuates systematic inequalities.
Wow. For the longest time, I never knew that's how our system was based off of. But Jared, can you go in depth about how the races work together in solidarity?
Oh yeah, so like basically the Koreans, African Americans, and the Latinos were all struggling in a system that set them up to go against each other instead of working together. But there were like many times before the riots where like the Koreans would give them job opportunities to Latinos, and they began to build relationships with the store owners and would help them protect their businesses. Some of the African Americans would also help the Koreans, but it was never really shown in the media. The solidarity between the Koreans and Latinos showed how two immigrant communities came together to work through economic struggles. And then after a few days after the riots, about 30,000 people from various racial backgrounds, including members of both the Korean and Black communities, came together for a peace march in solidarity.
That peace march is an amazing example of how we can work together against the systems that are set against us. We need to band together against oppression to limit minority on minority hate, because ultimately, our fates are tied.
Yeah, you're right. Both the Koreans and black residents were both struggling. The black residents were in poverty and faced racism, while the Koreans and Latinos were immigrants trying to survive.
Wow, that I really didn't know all that stuff. I didn't know the LA riots were so much more deeper than I thought. But I think we can learn from this event, you know, we don't have to repeat the same mistakes that were made during these riots. And I think that we do need more solidarity right now, especially among races, as America is way more diverse than it was in like 1992, right? But that being said, though, does anybody have anything else to add before we go?
Yeah, so what I found most interesting and most surprising and most sad is that after learning about this event, is that the dominant race will always try to put down other minorities to make sure they're on top. And this is an example of the example of the rooftop Koreans goes from pitting the Koreans, Latinos, and Black Americans against each other, when in reality, as a society, we should be putting each other up instead of lifting each other down.
Yeah, I agree with what Aliana was saying. And if there's anything that I could take away from the event, it would probably be that the communities supporting each other and sticking together are stronger than division.
Through this podcast, I was able to learn about the LA riots and the roles that Korean Americans took to defend their community.
These are thoughts that we have after doing research for this podcast, but I want to pass it off to you guys, the audience. Regardless of what race you are, it's important to recognize your role in this battle for equality. So I want to ask you to think about these questions and reflect by either journaling or even discussing with someone else. First off, what steps can you take to better understand the struggles of other racial communities and build genuine solidarity, even if you don't share the same background? Have you ever witnessed or experienced racial tension or division in your own community? And how did you respond? And lastly, how can Asians and African American communities handle racial tensions without putting one as above or below the other after listening to this event or learning more about this event?
Well, that pretty much sums it up. Thank you guys very much, though. And I want to say thank you everyone for tuning in. And once again, this is the Cine Gang. We out.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Where We're From. This podcast is produced by students enrolled in Dr. Joanne Rondilla's Asian American Studies courses at San Jose State University.